You cry at commercials. You cry at songs. You cry when someone gives you a compliment, when a stranger shows you unexpected kindness, when you see elderly couples holding hands in the grocery store. You've been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, that you need thicker skin, that you take things too personally, that not everything is that deep. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that your tears were a problem, a weakness, something to apologize for, to hide, to train yourself out of. But I want to offer you a different lens today. What if I told you that your tears aren't a flaw in your design? What if they're actually evidence of a nervous system that's doing exactly what it's supposed to do? What if the crying isn't the problem at all, but rather your body's brilliant solution to a world that's far more intense than most people realize? Let me explain what's actually happening in your brain when you cry at everything, and why the people who dismiss your tears simply don't understand how perception works. Your brain processes emotional information through something called the limbic system. This is your emotional command center. It includes structures like the amygdala, which detects emotional significance, and the hippocampus, which connects emotions to memories and meaning. Now, here's what researchers have discovered. Not all limbic systems are calibrated the same way. Some people have what psychologists call high sensory processing sensitivity. Their emotional detection system has the resolution turned way up. They're not imagining extra meaning in things. They're actually perceiving meaning that exists, but that other nervous systems are filtering out as background noise. Think of it like this. Imagine everyone is walking around with cameras built into their heads. Some people have standard definition cameras. They see the basic shapes and colors and movements. They get the general picture. But you have a 4K ultra high definition camera. You're seeing every subtle shift in facial expression, every micro adjustment in tone of voice, every layer of subtext in a conversation, every connection between this moment and 10 others like it. You're not seeing things that aren't there. You're seeing things that are there, but that most people's cameras aren't equipped to capture. This is why you cry at commercials. You're not being manipulated by cheap emotional tricks. You're responding to the genuine human truth embedded in that story. The elderly man learning to text his granddaughter, the father teaching his daughter to ride a bike. Your nervous system recognizes the universal human experiences being depicted: connection, loss, courage, love, and it responds with the appropriate physiological reaction to profound meaning, which is tears. But here's where it gets complicated. We live in a world that was largely designed by and for people with standard definition cameras, people whose nervous systems filter out most emotional data to focus on concrete practical information. And when you show up with your high definition perception, they tell you you're seeing too much, that you're making things up, that you're being dramatic. You're not. You're being accurate. Let me show you what this looks like in real interactions. Someone makes a joke at your expense in a group setting. Everyone laughs. You feel a wave of hurt. Later, someone tells you you're too sensitive, that you can't take a joke. But here's what actually happened. You detected the subtle edge of hostility under the humor, the slight pleasure in your discomfort, the social jockeying for position disguised as playfulness. Your nervous system registered the attack, and when you named it, when you showed that you felt it, suddenly you became the problem, because acknowledging the aggression would require everyone else to admit it was there. And it's easier to tell you you're imagining things than to confront the uncomfortable truth your nervous system detected. This is what psychologists call gaslighting. When someone tells you that your accurate perception is inaccurate, when they frame your sensitivity as the issue rather than addressing what you're being sensitive to. And it's devastating because it teaches you to doubt your own nervous system, to dismiss your tears as overreaction rather than appropriate response. So let's establish something foundational right now. Your tears are data. They are your body's way of signaling that something emotionally significant is happening. They are not good or bad, weak or strong. They are information, and learning to read that information rather than suppress it is one of the most important skills you can develop. Now, Let's talk about what happens when you try to stop crying, when you shame yourself for your tears or force yourself to hold them back. Your body produces tears as a way to discharge emotional activation. Crying is literally a completion mechanism. It allows your nervous system to process and release the emotional intensity so it doesn't stay trapped in your body. When you block that release, when you stuff it down and tell yourself to be strong, you're not actually managing the emotion. You're just trapping it. And that trapped activation has to go somewhere. It becomes anxiety, muscle tension, headaches, insomnia, irritability, unexplained physical pain. Your body is brilliant. It will find a way to discharge what needs to be discharged. The question is whether you're going to work with it or against it. Research in neuroscience shows us that emotional tears, tears that come from emotional experiences rather than physical irritation, contain different biochemical components than reflex tears. Emotional tears contain higher concentrations of stress hormones like cortisol and endorphins. Your body is literally excreting stress chemicals when you cry. You're not falling apart, you're cleaning house, you're restoring equilibrium. The tears are the solution, not the problem. But I know what you're thinking. If crying is so healthy, why does it feel so terrible? Why do you feel embarrassed, exposed, out of control when the tears come? And that's a fair question. Here's the answer. You don't feel bad because of the crying. You feel bad because of what you've been taught about crying. The shame isn't inherent to the tears. The shame is learned. It's the accumulated weight of every time someone told you to toughen up, stop being so dramatic, get over it. Every time someone looked uncomfortable when you cried. Every time you had to apologize for your own feelings. That shame is socialization, and you can unlearn it. Let me give you a new protocol. From today on, when you feel tears coming, I want you to name what's happening without judgment. Instead of, oh God, I'm crying again, what's wrong with me? Try this. I'm having an emotional response. My body is discharging activation. This is my nervous system taking care of me. You're not describing the tears as good or bad. You're describing them as neutral biological process, because that's what they are. And when you remove the shame narrative, the tears actually pass more quickly, because you're not creating a secondary layer of distress about the tears themselves. You're just letting them do their job. Now let's address the practical reality. You live in a world with other people, and sometimes crying at work, crying in the grocery store, crying in the middle of a conflict creates complications. So I'm not telling you to just let it rip everywhere all the time. I'm telling you to stop treating your tears as something to be ashamed of and start treating them as something to be managed strategically. There's a big difference. Shame says there's something wrong with you for crying. Strategy says crying is a normal physiological response that sometimes needs to happen in private rather than public. Here's what that looks like in practice. You feel tears coming during a meeting at work. Instead of fighting them or panicking, you say, "Excuse me for a moment," and step out. You go to the bathroom or your car or an empty conference room. You let yourself cry for 60 seconds. You splash cold water on your face. You take 3 deep breaths. You go back. You haven't failed. You haven't done anything wrong. You've given your body what it needed and then return to the situation. That's not weakness. That's sophisticated emotional regulation. Or maybe you're in a conflict with a partner. You start crying. They get frustrated. They say, "Why are you crying? I can't have a conversation when you're crying like this." And instead of apologizing, instead of feeling ashamed, you say this: "I'm crying because this matters to me, and my body is processing the emotional intensity. I'm still listening. I can still talk. The tears don't mean I can't handle this conversation. They just mean I'm feeling something big right now." You're educating them. You're refusing to accept the premise that your tears disqualify you from the interaction. You're staying in your body, acknowledging what's happening, and continuing to show up. This is crucial. Your tears do not make you incapable. They don't mean you're falling apart or losing control. They're just tears. They're just salt water. And you can cry and still think clearly, still advocate for yourself, still hold boundaries, still make decisions. But you've been taught that crying means collapse, that tears equal helplessness. And that's simply not true. Some of your strongest moments will involve tears, because staying present with difficult emotions while they move through you requires immense courage. Let me tell you what's actually happening. when other people get uncomfortable with your crying. Their discomfort is about them, not you. When you cry, you're demonstrating emotional vulnerability. You're showing that you feel things deeply, and that triggers something in people who have learned to suppress their own feelings. Your tears are a mirror. They reflect the emotional aliveness that they've disconnected from. And instead of recognizing that and dealing with their own shutdown, they try to shut you down. They tell you you're too much, too sensitive, making too big a deal of things. But what they're really saying is, your emotional freedom threatens my emotional control, and I need you to stop. You don't have to stop. You don't have to shrink your emotional range to make other people comfortable. You don't have to apologize for being alive in a world that is genuinely overwhelming, genuinely beautiful, genuinely painful. Your tears are proof that you haven't numbed out, that you haven't built walls so thick that nothing can touch you anymore. And that is something to celebrate, not suppress. Now, I want to distinguish between healthy crying and crying that signals you need support, because there is a difference. Crying at beautiful moments, at sad movies, at meaningful conversations, at moments of connection or loss or joy, that's healthy emotional expression. That's your nervous system working as designed. But crying constantly, feeling unable to stop, feeling like you're drowning in tears every day, that can be a sign of depression, anxiety, unprocessed trauma, or emotional overwhelm that requires professional support. I'm not saying all crying is healthy regardless of context. I'm saying that your capacity to cry, your emotional responsiveness, is not inherently pathological. But if you feel like you're crying all the time and it's interfering with your ability to function, that's worth exploring with a therapist. There's no shame in needing help to understand what your tears are trying to tell you. Here's what I want you to understand about your high sensitivity. It's not just about crying, it's about the way you move through the world. You notice things, you feel things, you process things at a depth that most people don't. And yes, that means you feel pain more acutely, but it also means you experience beauty more intensely, joy more fully, connection more deeply, love more profoundly. You don't get to selectively numb. You can't turn down the volume on pain without turning down the volume on everything else. So the question isn't how to stop being sensitive. The question is how to honor your sensitivity while building the skills to navigate a world that wasn't designed for people like you. And that starts with reframing your tears, not as weakness, but as strength, not as breakdown, but as breakthrough, not as something to apologize for, but as something to trust. Your tears are telling you what matters, what moves you, what hurts you, what heals you, and learning to listen to that information, to respect it, to let it guide you toward people and places and experiences that can hold your depth. That's the work. So from today on, when you cry at the commercial, when you cry at the song, when you cry at the unexpected kindness, I want you to say this to yourself. There I am, feeling something real, being fully alive, refusing to numb out in a world that rewards disconnection. These tears are my superpower. They're proof that I haven't given up on feeling, and that makes me brave. Your tears aren't too much. The world is just used to too little.